Hi, and welcome. You're listening to the X22 Report. My name is Dave, and this is episode 1600A, and today's date is June 25th, 2018, and the title of the episode is, The Fed Just Released Big News Regarding the Collapse, but No One Noticed. Let's get into the economic collapse financial news. Now, a couple days ago, we talked about how the Supreme Court, they voted on an online tax, and we know that brick and mortar stores, they're in trouble. Online stores, if this tax goes through, that's going to destroy the entire online system of purchasing. And we need to look at this very, very carefully because the Supreme Court, they basically totally rejected everything that the United States was built upon. No taxation without representation. Instead of the greed of the states being confined to their own citizens, the Supreme Court has ruled that if you are not a citizen of the state still has jurisdiction to compel you to collect taxes as an economic slave without any right to be represented in that state to oppose such legislation. This is exactly what the American Revolution was all about. The English Parliament would pass legislation that compelled colonists to pay taxes, yet they were not represented in the English Parliament to object. This is the most fundamentally unconstitutional, anti-democratic decision ever handed down by the Supreme Court, all because of the hunt for money by the states. And we know that the states, they are in trouble. And we can see at this point that the Supreme Court voted, okay, let's go ahead, let's allow the states to collect the sales tax. Now, this doesn't mean that every single state right now is going to be collecting sales tax, and they're going to be putting legislation moving forward, because Congress, well, they can still act. They can overrule this with clear legislation. But if they don't, this will be a complete and utter disaster for e-commerce going forward. Just where the corporate media was out there saying online sales is taking away all the sales from brick and mortar. No, online sales is going to go down the tubes. Brick and mortar is going down the tubes. Both together are going to be going down the tubes. And remember, 70% of the GDP is made up of individuals purchasing goods. And this is not going to help, because we've seen a sales tax in Japan. We've seen it on soda. We've seen it whenever the government gets involved and they impose taxes, sales go down. It doesn't help the situation. And this is just going to make it a lot worse. We see things out in the housing market. Well, things are not going well whatsoever. We know existing home sales, pending home sales, and now new home sales, they are plunging. Now, there's only one area where new home sales moved up, around 6.7%, and this was in the South. All other areas, it is plunging. But you need to remember something very important. There was a major downward revision in April to make the sales look a lot better in May. But it really didn't help that well. Because when we look, new home sales were flat or negative in 3 of the 4 regions. The Northeast, they were down by negative 10%. The Midwest, 0% flatline. West, down negative 8.7%. And the South, that is the only place where it's surged, and that is surging by 17.9%. Now, when we look at this, we can see that there's a lot of speculators in the South, especially in Florida, where they're coming up from South America and many other areas where they're speculating on the condos that they're building, houses that they're building. And we saw this back prior to 2008. And once everything started to crash, apartment buildings, condos, everything was just left there. And that was that. Right now, we're seeing the same exact thing. The same thing's happening in Miami and many different areas. But we can see right now, this push is not going to last whatsoever, because the entire rest of the country, well, that is plunging. And we know that pending home sales, we know that existing home sales, and as prices of homes continually rise and the interest rates continually move up, it's not going to last. Things are going to come tumbling down, and we've seen this before. Now, the strategy that Trump and the Patriots are putting forward, it seems to be working right now, And we need to remember what this strategy is. Remember, the EU was created by the central bank, the globalist, to basically have a one currency system within this area. That was the beginning stages of basically letting everyone know that, hey, look, it worked there. Now maybe we can expand this and have a one currency system for the complete world. And this was just the beginning stages where they had to show that it would work. And they created, the World Trade Organization. They were putting together a globalist trading system. And European officials, well, they're struggling to do everything they can to save the WTO, which appears headed for an all but certain demise thanks to Trump's aggressive trade policies. EU leaders have apparently circulated an internal memo drafted by the European Commission that accuses the U.S. of deliberately instigating the collapse of the global trade order and warns of an upcoming trade apocalypse. In short, if this document is any guide, the trade war is about to get worse. And this is what this is all about. This is about breaking up the globalist system. And it went on to say that our world will go back to a trading environment where rules are only enforced where convenient and where strength replaces rules as the basis for trade relations, according to this memo. And what is happening right now is that one body is not going to control this. There's going to be bilateral trades all over the place. So if this trade goes bad, that trade is still good. And we can see right now, it's not one body just controlling it. It's diversified. And China's doing it. The U.S. is doing it now. And the European countries, they're moving in this direction also. Now, something very strange, Mnuchin was out there, and in a bizarre development, one day after the Financial Times, the Wall Street Journal, Bloomberg all reported that the U.S. is preparing restrictions on Chinese investments in the U.S., Steve Mnuchin came out and he tweeted on behalf of Donald Trump that the stories are false, fake news. And this tweet went something like this. On behalf of real Donald Trump, the stories on investment restrictions in Bloomberg, the Wall Street Journal, are false, fake news. The leaker either doesn't exist or know the subject very well. Now, this is very interesting because Mnuchin, who came out and said things about China, about the TPP, where Trump is looking into it, that all turned out to be fake and false. So I don't know why Trump would have Mnuchin come out and do this for him. That kind of doesn't make sense, but we'll have to see what comes out of this, or maybe he's setting Mnuchin up. I don't know. Remember, Mnuchin is a Goldman Sachs boy, and in the past, he has been called out on certain things. So we'll have to see how this goes and what happens from this point on. Now, what's very interesting, we mentioned yesterday about the Bank of International Settlement and how they are telling us that the banking system, well, it's not as strong as we all might think. They've been manipulating their books, and they basically explained how they were doing this. Now, it looks like they are separating themselves from what is about to happen, where the entire system is going to implode. They don't want to be a part of it because, again, they're the Rothschild banking system. They need to be above this. They can't be implicated in destroying the economies. This way, they can restart the entire system and then again put in other private Western central banks into the countries and start the whole thing all over again. They don't care about the Fed, the ECB. They don't care about that. If they're destroyed, it makes no difference as long as they're kept separate from what is going on. And that's why they came out with that report. Now, what's very interesting is that the Fed, they just made a very interesting announcement, and it's kind of under the radar. Chairman Jerome Powell, he delivered an important message that went largely unreported. And when we look at this message, he's telling us that he intends to pop the bubbles, both asset price and credit bubbles. Now, he didn't communicate a precise threshold for bubble popping, but I believe he meant not just big bubbles, but potentially little bubbles and possibly even pre-bubbles if they become necessary to contain the risks of financial instability. Now, basically, we had in the past all different Fed chairmen. And if we go back in time, it was Janet Yellen, Ben Bernanke, and Alan Greenspan. And in their speeches that they gave, or when they had these meetings, they never talked about financial excess. And it's very interesting because Powell actually mentioned this. He went on to say, "We are aware that raising rates too slowly might raise the risk that monetary policy would need to tighten abruptly down the road in response to an unexpectedly sharp increase in inflation or financial excesses, jeopardizing the economic expansion." Now, the language in this sentence might seem ordinary if read very quickly, but comparisons to what we would have heard from Yellen show it was a clear departure. So Powell's opening statement wasn't just boilerplate language. Those three words, or financial excesses, never appeared in the same context in any of Yellen's 16 press conferences, let alone in the opening statement. Here's the next excerpt. This one is in response to a question about wage growth. "Our role, though, is also to make sure that the maximum employment happens in a context of price stability and financial stability, which is why we're gradually raising rates." Now, Yellen never defined the Fed's role in the same way. She never elevated financial stability to a position alongside the traditional goals of full employment and stable prices. And take note, Powell was answering a question about wage growth. There was no prompting whatsoever. The next questionnaire asked about inflation overshooting the Fed's target, and here's Powell's response to this. "We're going ahead and moving gradually and trying to navigate between two risks, really. One would be moving too quickly. Inflation never gets back to target. If we do that, and the other is moving too slowly, and then we have too much inflation or financial instability, and we have to raise quickly, and that can also have bad outcomes." Once again, Powell cited financial risks as a potential trigger for monetary tightening, and once again, his phrasing, namely the conjunction "or," suggested he could raise rates quickly even without an inflation threat. So what does this mean? Powell announced he's not afraid to pop bubbles, meaning both asset and credit bubbles, depending on how far he decides to take it. He could even act to prevent bubbles before they inflate. So what he's saying here is that he's preparing and pushing this system to the edge to pop these bubbles. This is why the Fed is doing what they're doing right now. And I think what he's going to be doing is pushing this even harder to bring down the system. And he's laying it out right in front of us, saying, yes, he will do this because he sees that inflation will get out of hand. They won't be able to control it, and it will end up in a bad way. And if they don't do enough, it's going to add up in a bad way, because what's happening here is the economy is built on an illusion. There's nowhere for the Fed to go at this point. It's a no-win situation. Why? Because it was never meant to go this long. They never thought they would have to keep the system going this long. They thought they were going to have their event, which most likely was going to be some type of war to cover up this entire collapse. Plans changed. Things changed. They don't know what to do at this point. And they're preparing right now to create this whole entire story, to create this narrative of why this system came down. And they're in the position where they can pop the bubbles. And if they do pop the bubbles, it's not going to be, oh, let's inflate it very slowly. It's going to be a pop, and it's going to just completely deflate, and things are going to come down very, very quickly. We've seen this happen before. In the past with Greenspan, with Ben Bernanke, with Yellen, They just let the bubbles go and go and go and go, and they pop by themselves. They knew they were going to pop, but they didn't force them to pop. Here, I think what they're doing, they're going to force them to pop because they have no choice right now. Because they need to control the narrative, they need to control what is going on, and they need to blame it on another party. And I think this is why the biz right now is separating themselves, saying the banks are insolvent. They're the ones who did this. They're the ones who manipulated their books. The Fed right now is pushing towards bringing the system down. The biz knows this. They know exactly what's going on here, and they don't care if the Fed doesn't exist after this. They don't care if the ECB doesn't exist after this, because all they do is they can restart and put another central bank in. As long as the biz and stays intact, they don't care what happens to the other central banks that they can control. So we see right now, there's a push to bring the system down. The Rothschilds are positioning themselves away from the other central banks because they know they can't be associated with any of this stuff. And Powell, he is pushing to bring the system down and pop the bubbles. So no matter what, no matter how this comes down, it's going to be a difficult period of time for many, many people. And if the credit bubble pops and if the asset bubble pops, it's going to be a very difficult time because everything is just going to freeze up. So this is why you need to be ready and prepared. Listen, everyone, thanks a lot for listening. Be well, be safe, and especially be prepared. Thanks a lot.